When a magnitude 7.8 earthquake struck the southern Philippines this week, it wasn't a freak event. It was the latest chapter in a story written into the very ground beneath that country. A story of two vast pieces of the planet's crust locked in a slow, relentless collision. In this video, I want to step back from the breaking news and explain the science. Why this quake happened where it did, what the feature called the Cotabato Trench actually is, why the Philippines is one of the most earthquake-prone nations on Earth, and what the long sequence of aftershocks really means for the people living there now. Let's start with the big picture, the Ring of Fire. If you drew a line tracing the edges of the Pacific Ocean, up through Indonesia and the Philippines, past Japan, across to Alaska, and down the Western Americas, you'd trace a horseshoe where the majority of the world's earthquakes and volcanic eruptions happen. We call it the Ring of Fire. It's not a place so much as a boundary, the edges of the giant slabs of rock, called tectonic plates, that make up the surface of the Earth. The Philippines sits squarely on this ring, wedged between several of these plates. That location is the single reason the country averages thousands of earthquakes a year. Most are too small to feel. But the same forces that produce those small tremors are capable, now and then, of producing a 7.8. Now the specific culprit in this quake, the Cotabato Trench. Off the southwestern coast of Mindanao, the seafloor plunges into a long, narrow trough, a trench, where one tectonic plate is being forced down and underneath another. Scientists call this subduction. Picture two cars pushing against each other bumper to bumper. One eventually rides up while the other is shoved beneath. The plates do the same thing, but they don't move smoothly. They lock together under enormous pressure, sometimes for decades or centuries, while the strain builds. And then, in a few violent seconds, they slip. That sudden release of decades of stored pressure is the earthquake. The Cotabato Trench is one of these collision zones, and it has produced major quakes before. This is why the quake was so strongly felt, and it comes down to two things: size and depth. A magnitude 7.8 is enormous. The magnitude scale is not linear, so a 7.8 releases dramatically more energy than, say, a magnitude 6. And this quake was shallow, only about 33 kilometers down. A shallow quake delivers its energy to the surface with much less distance to weaken it, so the shaking at ground level is far more intense than a deep quake of the same size. Shallow plus powerful plus close to a city of 700,000 people. That combination is precisely what makes an earthquake deadly, and it's what we saw in General Santos. Now let me explain the tsunami connection, because it's a direct result of where this quake happened. When a quake like this ruptures the seafloor, it doesn't just shake. It can suddenly shove a massive section of the ocean floor upward or downward. That motion displaces a huge volume of water above it, and that displaced water races outward as a tsunami. Because this quake was offshore, the warning systems triggered immediately for the Philippines and its neighbors. The waves recorded this time were relatively modest, around 1.5 meters. But the same mechanism, with a different rupture, is what has produced the catastrophic tsunamis of history. That's why the warnings go out instantly, and why coastal residents are told to move the moment the ground stops shaking, without waiting to be told twice.
Let's talk about the aftershocks, because this is the part that's still unfolding for the people there. After a main shock that large, the crust around the rupture is readjusting, and it does so through hundreds of smaller earthquakes. Aftershocks. FIVOLCs recorded well over 100 in the first hours alone, the largest in the mid-6 range. Here's why that's dangerous, not just frightening. The main shock cracks and weakens buildings, and then an aftershock, itself a serious quake, can finish the job and bring a damaged structure down, often while people believe the worst is over and have gone back inside. Aftershocks generally decrease in frequency and size over days and weeks, but a large one can strike at any point in that window. It's why officials keep people out of damaged buildings long after the initial quake. So the question everyone asks, could this have been predicted? And can the next one? Here is the honest answer, and you should be skeptical of anyone who tells you otherwise. No. Despite everything we know about where earthquakes are likely, and we know the fault zones very well, science cannot currently predict the day, the hour, or the exact place a specific earthquake will strike. What scientists can do is identify the high-risk zones, like the Cotabato Trench, estimate long-term probabilities, build early warning systems that give seconds of notice once a quake begins, and, most importantly, push for buildings engineered to survive the shaking. That last part is the real lesson. In earthquake country, it is very often not the quake that kills people. It's the buildings. The difference between a tragedy and a catastrophe is almost always how the structures were built. Which brings me to what actually protects people, because this isn't only a story about danger, it's a story about preparation. The regions that live with earthquakes and survive them do a few things consistently. They enforce building codes designed for seismic shaking. They run drills so people know to drop, cover, and hold on. They build tsunami evacuation routes on vulnerable coasts, and they keep emergency supplies ready because help can take days to arrive. None of it can stop the plates from moving. All of it changes how many people walk away when they do. For a country sitting on the ring of fire, that preparation isn't optional. It's the entire difference between a quake that's felt and a quake that's mourned. So what comes next for Mindanao? In the near term, aftershocks that will gradually fade, a recovery effort that will take far longer than the news coverage lasts, and the slow work of assessing and rebuilding what was damaged. In the long term, the Cotabato Trench will keep doing what it has done for millions of years. The plates will lock, the strain will build, and someday, no one can say when, they will slip again. That is not a prediction of doom. It's simply the nature of living on a restless planet, and the reason that understanding these forces and respecting them matters. We cover these events the right way here. The real science, the honest limits, no fear-mongering, and no false predictions. If this helped you understand what happened beneath the Philippines this week, subscribe. There's always another force of nature worth understanding, and we'll cover it the right way. Our thoughts remain with everyone affected in Mindanao.